Ladies and gentlemen, stepping into the ring from the wall of digital mastery, a legend in the making, renowned, unstoppable, and unmatched in skill and precision. The one, the only, the master of materials, the god of crafts, Karkizo!
Okay, let's jump into it. So far, you know me, I usually, when I do these kind of tutorials, I just wing it. Like I open the graph, I improvise what I'm seeing, and the only preparation I did was to go into this graph before, have a look at the nodes that I used, how I arranged them, and I organized the graph. Like I make it easier to follow, easier to get along, and actually like prepare it how you would prepare it in production. But anyway, I was asked by some person about a breakdown of this cloth material or this embroidery generator. And not surprisingly, it doesn't look too good or too good as in the renders when just looking here at it in the viewport. The reason being is that cloth or fabrics generally want a kind of more advanced shader setup. Just for the reason of them having like a lot of prerequisites and a lot of parameters in the shader that actually makes it look fuzzy and soft and shiny towards the horizon. So you could mimic this in Designer, but actually as long as you know what your height output is going to be and what you need, this is like you can just deal with that. So even though it looks bad, just imagine that as long as you alter the textures correctly, it's going to look good. Right, so the idea was fairly easy. I took whatever input map, like bitmap I have here, and this is automatically turned into an embroidery, and I have like a lot of parameters to adjust here. By the way, I'm just going to quickly move this over to 4K. The reason for this is actually really easy. As long as you're working with like such fine details or scattering or splines, you usually want to have that resolution. You need that precision. You can always sample your textures back down here. Like before your output, you could very well just input a transform 2D node and like decrease the output size. So it is on 2K. So it down samples before exporting. But yeah, anyway, you won't generally be working on 4K for this to work correctly. And if I zoom in here, you can see that it's like very rough and some details are even missing, I would say, like they're eating away. But as soon as let me quickly change the shader here. As soon as I introduce the displacement, this is going to be a lot easier to follow along visually. Okay, this was a little bit harsh. Let's go with something like this. This is more realistic. And now, like just from the displacement, even when zoomed in, you can see that the shadow is picking up on that notch and it looks separated more. So again, this is something that you would just expect to work out of the box as long as you alter the textures correctly. Okay, let's jump into the graph. So what actually happened here? The first thing I did was to downsample it, not downsample, transform it. Like I wanted to be more in the center, just because the actual scope of the material was to also include like the fabric around it. But if you only wanted to go for the generator, you didn't need to scale. Like you could very well just use the input as it is. Let me quickly check for that. Yes. You see, however, like I will go over why it looks like this, but you see that my threads here are now like more spaced, and this has to do with the splines or the path that are generated from that input map. So in order to like have that now working correctly, I would be using my scaled map again, just so it looks correct. All right, so the first thing I wanted to tackle is, oh, by the way, I'm using like 265 by 265. You can really downscale your input map, and this is also going to help pick up the path easier for the spline generator later, just because you have less information or less pixels where different information is jumping from one to the other. I will go over this again. It makes sense in a second. However, the first thing I did was to use a quantized color node, and just to make sure that I reduce whatever input I have to a fixed set of colors, because the more colors you have, the harder it gets to colorize it later on. And also, depending on how your input is looking, you don't want to have a lot of shifts. You actually just want the pure color that is available in there. For an input like this is not much needed, but if I zoom in, you can see that we are getting rid of like this anti-aliased pixels around here. It gets more stepped, and you get like fixed colors for this, which is very good. And then I'm using a view color palette node. Nothing changed here, but I get the set of colors that I need to pick later on. So this is really just to pick a color. And it's a very robust way to do this. By the way, I don't have to have this on 4K. You can also set it to absolute and go to like 16 by 16. Yeah, this will interpolate on the thumbnail, but still work on the 2D view. And it's a little bit faster. You can see on the timings that this is still quite taxing, even though it's a very low resolution texture. Right, so with that in place, the first thing I do is use a grayscale color conversion. You could also just convert your input to grayscale, but again, I need to sample my data from this, so it doesn't make sense to do this beforehand. So I'm using the grayscale conversion here, and then a histogram scan to get my first input map. I need this because for the final result, I want to separate the inner embroidery to have a different thread pattern than my outer fabric. Again, if you are using this just for the generator, this might not be needed, because you could very well just histogram scan the whole input here, because everything should have the same thread. But again, actually, you could very well just generate as much masks as you want, but for this specific example, I just needed one. So this is all I did here. Right, so the next thing I did was to use a bevel smooth. And the reason for that is that I needed to extend again on the mask to the outer parts. So you could see that I'm using the out direction and a little bit of smoothness and like a very low distance. And this is generally just pushing in both directions, like here and here outwards. And that helps with picking up the outer shape. And I just noticed here, actually, that this is some obsolete stuff. I'm sorry for explaining this too badly, but you need the bevel smooth to pick up like on the edge. It's like a soft edge detect. This is generating the path that you need for your outer spline to scatter. And then you use a path to spline node, which just like has a precision slider. You can tweak it as you need. Right, and this is going to give me this later on when I append the splines, which again is not needed because I just noticed that the path down here, I think beforehand I had a different idea and it didn't work out, and I just left it here because you can see it's only generating this path down here, so it doesn't make a difference, and I didn't notice in the process. So actually we could just very well grab these here and get rid of all that nodes together, and it saves a little bit of computation time. And it looks better overall. So I'm going to move this again here and have a look at the... Right. From mask to path, you get your path data, which looks like this. Then you use a path to spline, which can't be previewed on the node itself. It's a little bit sad. You would have to like include another spline node after this, which is a spline render or spline preview. I don't remember how they're called to actually visualize this, but in the end, you can also just input this into the scatter on splines grayscale node, which will be your final node anyway. And then you can preview how it's looking. So this is for my outer shell, the outline. And what I did here in the settings was basically just use the shape amount scatter node, which is also why it looked more spaced when I scaled the mask at the beginning, because it's using a fixed amount of shapes that I'm scattering along there. If I would change this to shape spacing, this would be much more resolution dependent and more robust as well. But I picked shape amount here because I was just dialing in the numbers and tweaking until it looked good. Again, this was meant for a challenge and I had like 1 hour or so to post this. So I had to be like very fast with this. I didn't change anything here unless the pattern input. Right, so the input that I'm using here is a special pattern that I did. However, you could also very well just use a paraboloid and scale it a little bit. Let me see where can I scale it here? In the Y direction? No, the X direction. It takes a while, but you see we are more or less getting to the same result. More or less, because again, you would have to tweak the values, but you see they are pretty similar. I just happened to use a custom input because I wanted to make sure that whatever I input at any given time for the fabric is like pre-done of me. Like I want every little part of this to look like a certain thread. So I didn't want to work with a initial shape and just scale it and call it a day. I just wanted to have a real thread shape here that I can input in there. Any more settings I did here? I think no. Just played with the scale random. A little bit of random rotation, like a little bit of randomness everywhere actually just enhances the visuals. Just don't go overboard. I see a lot of people just dragging the slider all the way to 1. For example, in position random and using a tile sampler, it's not always going to make it look better. Just be very conservative with random stuff. Right, and that's it. Like basically that node is like out of the box. I just tweaked the scale and the shape amount. That's it. Like not a lot of magic here. But now let's go to the shape input. Again, I'm using splines here just to make my life a little bit easier. You could very well achieve this with a trapezoid, some transforms, even an SVG and the non-uniform blur. Like however you get there doesn't matter, but I wanted to like try out how to get there with splines. So I took a spline polyquadratic with just 3 points. Yeah, with just 3 points. And roughly place them like this. You could see like these arrows here are the direction helpers, just to be sure that I know where this is really going along. I always have them on. But nothing special. Like you could very well drag this somewhere else, and this is probably going to mess up with the generator. Again, these values are like very handpicked, but actually they just made it a little bit bigger on the outline, which is also fine with me. By the way, I'm going back to 2K because that's a little bit stressing on the calculation while I'm recording. But anyway, I just made that spline here and then again used the scatter on splines grayscale. And this time I'm using the paraboloid pattern and like a very low shape spacing. And that basically places so many paraboloids along that spline that they're starting to interpolate visually. So if I increase the shape spacing, you're going to see this looks like a maggot. Like you see the paraboloids spaced here, but as long as you're going like very, very low with the spacing, yeah, this is going to look like a smooth, continuous shape. Something I changed to, let me quickly check. The spline height multiplier, just to see if that's... No, it basically just helps to avoid like the overexposure, like too high clipping values. Like you need it to be smooth, so I just increased this to 1, which helped with it, so I didn't bother too much. And there's one more thing, but I don't remember where the setting is. But generally, you could see that the inner part is a little bit bigger, like wider, and the outer parts are a little bit smaller. And there's a setting here, which is probably the thickness. Yeah, you can see here for each point, you can set a thickness. And this thickness parameter is carried over to the scatter on spline grayscale node. And there is one slider here, the thickness scale. This should it be, yeah. Once you increase that, it's going to pick up the thickness values from your spline node that you're inputting there. And this allows for this smooth scale transition. Again, it's nothing special. It's really nothing special, but it just helped with achieving the shape that I wanted initially. So down here, before we move on, I want to speak again about this, just because I have done the very same thing down here, but for a different thread. So again, I'm using, I think I just copy-pasted the same spline, but I chose a few different settings with the scatter on spline grayscale. And this part is important because, like I call it the fabric generator, this is all what is happening in between here. And for this fabric, I very well wanted to have threads that have more detail already on them. Like usually you would probably go for a paraboloid node. Let me just quickly do this. Like something like this probably. Turn down the levels a bit. Then maybe take some scratches and lay them over. Let's see, max lighten maybe? No. We go for screen. You see, like embedding a few more thready or like hairy details on top of this. Maybe even like introduce some gradients here. What do we have here? The gradient axial. Another blend node. Use a min darken to introduce more chipping, like stuff like this you would usually do. But again, I wanted to do this with splines, and splines are perfectly fitted for this because they have the option to, for one, scatter a shape along the spline. So if I would go for a shape amount, for example, and reduce that amount a little bit, but increase its scale. Where is it? Size XY. Where is the scale here? There's too much settings. Let's just work with this. Maybe not Y, but X definitely. So the more I increase on this, the more weird interweaved patterns you achieve naturally just by using like the paraboloid shape and the max light and blend node that is inhibiting here. And this is also going to look cool. You can see like right away, whatever I change here in the settings is directly affecting the underlying fabric pattern. And I don't want to make it too big because this is going to cause some problems. So I'm going to revert my settings to what they were before, which was 1:1. Yeah, it was 1:1, but a different shape spacing. Yeah. So a very cool thing, and to achieve this special effect, is the duplicates mode. And I'm using linear here. You could also very well use circular, which gives like a different result, but linear is good to like stack along an axis. And the more duplicates you introduce, the more you have these little spots in between, which can give really, really cool results. You see, this is now much, much rougher. We also have the option to like rotate a little bit, which doesn't make sense if it's uniformly scaled. Excuse me. It's a little bit too much. And we're reducing here. Right. So a random rotation around the pivot is going to like fizzle the outer parts here a little bit. We're going to decrease the shape scale random a bit, generally decrease the scale here, which will introduce more spacing. And then you could also very well just work with these settings here. However, this is just, again, this is just the threads pattern that is going to be input into the scatter on spline grayscale for that whole distribution. And here you will notice much more difference once we tackle this. So the idea to cover a whole area with splines is actually very easy. You need, first of all, two splines, which are both mapped to like the very upper axis and the very low axis. So I have two splines, and you can see when I display the preview that you see these points here, they're like at 1 0 1 1 and 1 0 0 0 1. So they're very at the corner points, and then I bridge these splines. Right, and I activated the helper so you can see what's happening here. It's taking all the points, like you can see here, the splines amount is how often this should be sampled along the spline. And every point is going to be bridged downwards to the other point. And essentially what's giving me this is a set of 80 splines that are vertically going from up to down. And I can splatter my thread that I made here on these splines, which will result in that weave pattern. And in here is going to happen the most magic. So I generally recommend playing a lot with the settings here. Again, just the distribution amount, the duplicates amount, if it's circular, if it's linear, the rotation, like really just go in here and start playing with the settings. You see I'm like getting this wool stack pattern already, kind of like I got the gap here, but you get the idea. You have to play with these settings. You have to figure out what is working for you, what is not working. Actually, I just did the very same until there was some setting that I felt looked really cool. Like all I did here was trying to adjust the settings until there's something looking really nice that I can work with. And while I'm talking here, I have a hard time finding the rotation here. I want 0.5 to have them vertically orientated. Again, you can work with the shape spacing, like increase that. Then maybe go higher with the duplicates amount. Is there some offset along the tangent? Yeah, this makes them a little bit more directional. And then maybe some random size, or really increase this overall. Yeah, and now you get this continuous pattern. Whatever you're doing here, everything that you're doing inside this generator is going to look good, one way or the other. It's just a matter of what you really want to achieve. Okay, moving on. I make a portal node, like I like the portal nodes just a lot. Call it main fabric, and this is going to be carried over to the rest of the graph. Right, so we were on the outline here, covering this technique before. And down here, I made the very same setup that I did down here. Like these two splines that are going to be bridged together. And I took another scatter on splines grayscale. So I did the very same technique, but this time only for my input map, like the one that I beveled smoothed here. And this is going to be like the easiest way to mask it actually, or like the most organic way to mask it is to input this into the scale map. Because now this little like anti-aliased bevel that we have here with that low resolution is going to be upscaled from the 265 to the 2K. And this essentially makes it even more blurry. And the scale map parameter in here is going to pick up on this. Like you can very well control how far the scaling from the outer bounds to the inner bounds is going to be affected. I'm just going to search for that here. Here's that setting. And you could see that when I drag on this, like the outer parts outside of the mask are also going to be scattered. And by just increasing this to 1, I basically multiply my input map as a scale factor over the setting. And because my input here is black on the outer parts, has a gradient on the edge, and then is white on the inner parts, I basically mask the whole effect to be just inside the mask, and also have this little random fuzz on the outer sides. And this looks like a little bit off, but trust me, this is the type of little randomness I'm talking about that makes it look more realistic, because it embeds well better now into the rest, because we need to put this all together, right? Again, if you want, start playing with these settings. You're not limited in what you do here. Just find something that looks good for you, and rock with that. Like there are no rules. This actually looks also really cool and fuzzy, to be fair. Yeah. But I don't like the direction. Wait. Yeah, let's go in the other direction just to increase a little bit more contrast. But anyway, this is going to look different in Marmoset later because I exported the maps already. But just so you get the idea. Right, and now we have like our outline. We have our fabric and we have like our embroidery pattern in here. So the next step is to use a height blend. And you could also use a regular blend and use the mask that you already created. But again, using the height blend here is going to make it a little bit more realistic, because now you can see that the weaves are really like grabbing into each other, like they're interconnected. And this feels much more natural in terms of how this has been woven by a machine before. Right, so I noticed a few bright spots here. Right, this is from the outer parts, and yeah, again, it looks a little bit off, but trust me, it's, again, you could barely see it here, but just these little dots, this little like random spots that you wouldn't be probably seen there if it's made really perfectly, is what gives the realism in the end. All right, so now I'm already going for the height map. Right, I'm outputting my height blend here as embroidery blend, and now we're going to have another height blend with our main fabric. And again, you could see like how well interconnected these are at the edges right now. Like they don't look stamped on each other or hardly masked on each other. They just look interconnected. So I can only recommend using a height blend and working with these. But what you need to consider is that if you want very good layering and have this be more organic, be sure that your input values are already adjusted as you would layer them. So because I know that my outline is going to be the uppermost one, I want to make sure that these gray values are already higher than these gray values, and this is already higher than these gray values. They are now very, like I did not make any adjustments. Usually I would input a levels node after, because the result was just good enough using the height offset, which should already do this in the background. But for really good layering, you sometimes want to include a levels node here and like pre-process this range to blend with before you plug this into a height blend, just to make it more smooth. But it worked this time. But depending on what mask you choose, how you're laying this might not work that well. So always consider plugging in a levels node right after here before you're going into the height blend. So the next step is a multi-directional warp grayscale, which I use both inputs here. This is like a standard setup to increase a little bit noise. You could see like now I'm basically layering over the pattern over itself into a certain direction. This is just like a standard setup that I use to make different layers interconnected better. Right, then I'm using a levels now to bring this all a little bit down here, because we're going to overlay new values. You can see here. And I just chose a scratches generator to introduce some hair. It works very well, I think, because all the parameters here allow for this very random distribution. But the whole scattering is not exactly as I would like to have it. So I'm using my Kissel splatter node here, which essentially allows to overlay and scatter any input you want to have, even if it's tiled or not tiled. Makes it tiled in the splattering process all along, and you have like a lot of settings here, which are only the very basic things you need for good splattering and good scattering. And this will help like scatter a lot better. This node is available in my shop. It's very cheap. I might release it for free in the future, but in the meantime, what you can do is to take, for example, a where is it? A grunge map 1. You can increase the balance so it's pure white, and then drag on the brush pattern so you inset it, right? Like this, for example, maybe even a little bit less balance and more contrast. Then you blend this with your input using a multiply. So you're basically cutting away the edges. And if you now plug this into a tiled sampler, where is it? The tiled sampler grayscale. Now oops, pattern input, and now I increase the scale by a lot. I mean, there's no randomness in here, but you're going to notice that you don't have these edges apparent. Like you would usually, or depending on what input you use, you could see like the outer bounds, like essentially this grid pattern here. This is going to be vanished with using this technique. However, I'm tracking a little bit off. I'm using my input node to scatter this. I'm auto leveling this, and then I'm using a screen blend to, like you see, like very smoothly just get this over my threads. And it's important that you scale and scatter this to the correct scale ratio of your embroidery. So you don't want very big hair, you don't want too fine hair, because this is already very, very fine and hard to pick up for even resolutions at 4K. But anyway, I'm scattering this over this. Then I'm using another Kissel splatter, which is generating like this really felt type noise. And again, I'm screening this over. You can barely see a difference. It's making everything a little bit brighter and reducing some noise. It's looking better on 4K. This is also why I call it fuzz noise. And then again, I'm using another splatter to make this even finer and more granular. Auto leveling it. You can see it's basically a white noise, but much more organic. And again, I'm screen blending this over just to introduce more and more and more randomness and don't make it look too smooth and too round. Right. And that's basically my height map. Like just for that, that's my height map. I'm plugging this into a bend normal node. I figured out that the bend normal, because it's respecting the AO, is picking up way much better the details without over exaggerating them, because you don't want very harsh normals, but you want still intense differences between your patterns, which is why this works perfectly. And for the last step, I just took my outline embroidery, which was this one, non-uniform blurred, by using it as an input and a blur, which generally just pillow smooths it. Using a normal Sobel node and combining those, so you can see I get a little bit more push around the embroidery. This is not needed per se, because we're using height displacement later on, but I feel like it does a little bit more to highlight the outlines and the differences between the shapes here, which is cool. Right. So let me quickly check what we have here. Yeah, for the AO, I'm using the RTAO node. Again, you need to have a graphics card that supports RTX and ray tracing in order to use this node. The AO here, my setting is way too strong, like way too deep. This is not exactly how it would look like with correct physical scale. But I'm going to level it after into a more correct range. And here I only need it for my roughness later on. So yeah, I'm going to talk about this in a second. Just go over the color real quick. So the coloring process is very straightforward. I'm using my masks and I'm leveling them. Like I have my outline embroidery here and I'm leveling it to mask where the color is going to be. Then I'm blending this over this mask because I want to exclude all the threads that are below the embroidery here. And then I'm leveling this again. So I have like the very harsh mask that I need for the coloring inside here. Just a second, what I'm doing here. All right, yes, true. This was a little bit confusing. This setup here is basically a, like I'm trying to achieve this mask, but I'm using more nodes than I need to. I'm sorry. This could very well be achieved much easier. But what I did here was to blend two colors that I picked from my color palette, as you remember before. And I mixed them using the initial thread pattern for that embroidery, which just helped with, first of all, localizing where the color should be applied. This is why I needed that mask. And then I'm blending another color on top of this using the copy and my embroidery mask here. And this already gives a little bit more depth into the color. It's not perfect per se, but we don't care about that much because it just looks more natural, more organic. So in the next step, I'm starting to use the VW color variation, the best node ever made from Ben Wilson. Go grab it, it's for free. I'm using my outline here as input for the value and the hue, my color node that I sampled from my palette, and I just played with the settings to get like a little bit variation in here. So brighter parts on the inside, darker parts on the outside. And then I'm blending this over using the mask that I created before. So we have like the outline already. And for the last step, basically, I'm using the color variation node again. Now picking whatever color I like, because this is for the fabric out here. And I'm just using my main fabric as input and randomizing the values, the hue and whatnot, just to create more variation and interesting patterns here. And this is going to be blended together using my embroidery blend mask, which is like the final high blend where I tuck these together. I level it to get a mask. Again, it doesn't need to be perfect. It's even better if it's not perfect and a little bit fuzzy. And I'm blending this over. And you could see like there are a few color threads leaking through this. But again, this is much wanted because it just enhances the visual quality a lot. Next up, I'm using my final height, equalizing it to create like a fake AO basically. Auto leveling just to be sure we have no clipping values. Plugging this into a gradient map and multiplying this over. And this will, like, actually it's not really PBR what I'm doing here, but it just helps with the visual. So again, until it looks good, it's fine to use this, but be very conservative with blending AO over color. Yeah, then I'm plugging in this into another BW color variation node. I'm just very exaggerating the values, and all this does is create like a dilated, noisy version of my input before. And now comes the trick, because I have this very noisy values that are still represent in my base color here. I'm using a white noise fast, and this is going to be my opacity to blend between my new generated dilated noise over the original. And let me zoom in here. You could see like how more organic now my colors look. Like they look actually how you would capture some fabrics containing lots of color information. So this is a very cheap trick to introduce more realism. What do I have here? I did the same again using a different input and using my fuzz noise that I created before down here. You remember with the splatters. And using the same trick again, but this time using the screen node. And this will just bring my colors back into the range where I want to have them, because they're just too dark right now. I want to get rid of a little bit of shadowing. And apparently I'm redoing this process, but this time using the overlay node, which is going to pick up the brighter values and the darker values. How the blend mode works exactly can be a different video. I think there are a few out there which cover this already, but generally I just increase some more contrast based on that noise. And this is going to be my final color. So, and the last step is the roughness, and the roughness is always going to be, my initial step is going to take my output color, plug it into a grayscale conversion node, and use that as a base for my roughness. And the reason for this is simple. First of all, you get a lot of variation that you introduced already with your color blending. And also you generally want your normal and your roughness to follow along your color. There are a lot of examples where this doesn't apply for some generic stuff like metals and so on and so on. But as soon as you introduce shapes, layering stuff, different elements, different materials essentially, you want to do this. It's just the cheapest and easiest way to separate different values. Right, I'm just leveling them to get them brighter because we don't want very rough details here, even though my threads are kind of rough still. Now they're fine, they're at a value of 190, which is more than enough. It just looks darker. And then I'm blending over my ambient occlusion using an overlay node, and you can see like now I'm really introducing more noise in here. And this is going to be my final roughness. One more thing I did here for Marmoset later on was export a fuzz. Why is it called metallic? I'm exporting a fuzz mask and a curvature mask. And the curvature is just the curvature Sobel node. I didn't know what I need exactly later on in the shader, so I just tried with the default output. And the fuzz node is going to be another mask which drives where that actual fuzz shader property is going to pick up the details later on. Again, I was just experimenting with these values and they happen to work well. I would very much recommend doing your own research, R&D, and what works best, because this can be enhanced very easily probably, but I didn't have time to figure it out. And it worked good enough for me, so I just went with it. So the next thing we're going to do now is to jump over into Marmoset, where I'm going to quickly show you how I assigned these textures and my shader parameters. And this is basically it. So it's a very cheap graph. Not much detail went into this. Probably you could cut down more on this. Like I included more nodes than needed. But the general idea is to rely on spline data to like carry most of the stuff right off the bat without using too many nodes. You could also use a tile sampler, but again, this setup here with the vertical bridge splines is much more robust, because you could very well also introduce more splines or vector data in here to offset all your splines, which will naturally increase the possibilities you have, because it's not possible with the tile sampler to scatter along this. You always just have the scale factor, the random position, and this is not the same functionality that you're getting with the scatter on splines grayscale. All right, so now we are inside Marmoset, and you can see like these are the textures that I had initially when I started this video. They are the very same textures, and they just look much better. It's always a matter of understanding what your shader and what your lighting is going to need of your textures later on to be displayed like this. Right, so you can see my setup is very easy. I have a classic sky node in here with some random HDRI that was a little bit warm in the light because I wanted some warm light. I took this woman t-shirt round neck mesh from Substance Source, I think, because initially I wanted to do this for a t-shirt. It didn't work too well, but positioning the camera like this allowed for like displaying it cooler. And then I'm using a light source here, which is just a rectangle omni-light, which is kind of placed above here and like controls a little bit how this is going to look. And you can see like however I tweak this, the outcome is actually very cool. So I just went with this light setup, didn't bother too much, and took more time into setting up the shader correctly. So we are using displacement, classic. I set the scale center to 0 here because of the shirt. We had some overlaps because it's double-sided. You usually want to have that as 0.5, which is your baseline. Very low displacement scale. Classic norm map, classic albedo map, nothing too surprising. In the diffusion panel, I chose microfiber, which the name gives it away is the correct one to pick here for cloth. And in the roughness map, I plugged in my fuzz map. Again, I'm not too sure if I really see the difference, but it worked well for me, so I didn't bother with it and just went with it. Also ticking use microsurface. Then, under transmission, I used the volumetric scattering, and the scattering is helping achieve this a little bit more soft look. So if I decrease this, you see it's a little bit more opaque, and increasing it is making it a little bit more shiny, more softer look to it. Again, this is not needed per se, but I felt it helps a little bit. Also increasing the anisotropy just for randomness. And then again, we have the actual fuzz map here, where I didn't use my fuzz map, but I think this was my roughness. Yeah, I just plugged in the roughness here into the fuzz, which worked better than the actual fuzz map. So I like interchanged a lot of textures. Again, I was just trying it out. I checked this setting, and I also included my curvature map as a mask map for the fuzz. Again, I'm not too sure if it's picking up the details correctly, but it felt like using this, everything is more embedded better. Like the color values, the contrast and such just work better for me. So I went with this. Increasing the fuzz, and also I think you can set the color for the fuzz here, and you can see like we don't see any or barely any changes. So probably my settings are too low still for the fuzz to pick up. But you will eventually notice differences with other lighting settings and other setups when you try it out yourself. So keep in mind that these settings are meant to increase the realism of your cloth materials. Right, down here we have the classic roughness setup, so nothing special, I just plugged it in. And for the occlusion, I imported my ambient occlusion map, which you can see like helps a lot, even though it's not that realistic, but it helps just with that specific camera setting, so I went with it. And I also included my cavity map, and the cavity map this time is doing a lot because it's really emphasizing on that different noise patterns that we included into our threads. And again, I'm still using my ambient occlusion here as a cavity input and not my actually cavity, which I generated from the curvature. But again, I used all the textures in the correct slots and I interchanged them until they look good. And this is just the settings that I rolled with. Right, and what was happening here? Nothing of importance. This is just some obsolete stuff that I missed and didn't delete. So for my camera settings, I usually pick the FOV of 15. It's just like my signature camera FOV. And I also worked a little bit with the distortion, like having some barrel and percussion is helping to like drive some depth in here. Using the ACES tone mapper, even though we have AGX now, and I much more prefer AGX, but again, it was like I didn't have time for any post-processing, so I went for ACES because it has more contrast. So I wanted to have this render to be good out of the box. So this is the reason why I went with ACES. Usually I always recommend AGX because it has a much better color range, and it's much better in preserving colors in very dark and very bright aspects. There are a lot of tables where you can compare these two. ACES is fine, don't get me wrong, it's very fine, but AGX is just untoppable for me. It's my go-to choice every time. Right, and then some vignette, some bloom, some sharpen, some grain, just get all the effects in. Again, I didn't have time for post-processing, so I just slapped them into that scene here. Oh yeah, and some depth of field, of course. And that's about it. So thank you very much for looking into this video. I didn't expect it to go that long, actually. I hoped for like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, but I got dragged away a little bit, and there's a lot to talk about. Always lots to talk about. Anyway, thank you very much for tuning in. If you want to support me in this channel, please like, comment, subscribe, share, whatever feels like good to you. It helps me a lot. I appreciate it. I love reading your comments. Most of the tutorials that I'm working right now and the things I'm covering are actually from comments or people that reach out to me asking for some advice or insights into this. So if you want to have something covered, write it in the comments or message me at Discord, whatever feels best to you. Anyway, see you on the next one.